Imagine, if you will, being trapped in a room. But not just any room.
Right, definitely not a normal room.
No, you're in mid-19th century St. Petersburg, and you're standing in this dingy, coffin-like garret. The ceiling is slanted, and it literally feels like it's physically pressing down on your skull.
Yeah, if you stretch out your arms, you can pretty much touch both walls.
Exactly. And the air in this city is just thick. I mean, it's heavy with humidity, the smell of, like, cheap, acrid tobacco, stale sweat.
And the damp rot of the canals right outside.
Oh, yeah, the canals. It's unrelenting.
Right.
The wallpaper is peeling off in these jagged strips, yellowed like some old bruise. You're starving. You're profoundly isolated. And you are, entirely consumed by the echoing chamber of your own mind.
And we aren't just setting a mood here either.
Right.
This suffocating, claustrophobic little box is literally the incubator for one of the most dangerous, infectious ideas in all of literary history.
It really is.
Oh,
Welcome to the deep dive, everyone.
Thanks for having me. And yeah, it's the absolute definition of a psychological pressure cooker. The philosophical analysis we are stepping into today, delving into the mechanics of Fyodor Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, it really demands that we climb right into that terrible little room with him.
We have to, because we're basically dissecting the mind of a murderer here.
We are. But the mission here isn't to solve a whodunit.
Right. There's zero mystery about who's holding the axe.
Exactly. What we are conducting is a philosophical autopsy. We're exploring the anatomy of a terrifying question, which is, what actually happens to the human operating system when it tries to elevate itself above morality?
Above the law, above its own humanity.
Right, using nothing but pure, cold, calculated logic.
I want to frame this right out of the gate for you listening, because the central premise we're teasing out of these sources is completely mind-bending.
It really is.
The true punishment for a crime, according to this deep dive into Dostoevsky's world, it doesn't begin in a courtroom.
No, not at all.
It doesn't begin when a judge bangs a gavel, and it certainly doesn't begin years later in a freezing Siberian prison camp. The punishment begins the very microsecond the crime is committed.
Instantly.
Instantly, violently, and silently inside the mind of the perpetrator.
Yeah, the legal punishment is almost an administrative afterthought. The real terror is entirely existential. It's a biological and psychological collapse.
So to understand how a human mind becomes its own inescapable prison, we have to start by analyzing the architect of this specific crime, right?
Right. We need to look really closely at the protagonist, Rodion Romanovich Raskolnikov.
Okay, so who is he?
Well, he is a former law student. He is brilliant. He's incredibly sensitive, but he's also impoverished to the point of literal physical starvation.
And he dropped out of the university because he just can't pay his fees.
Exactly. He walks the sweltering streets of St. Petersburg in actual rags. His shoes are falling apart.
And he's constantly dodging his landlady on the stairs because he's, months behind on rent?
Months. He's living on the absolute fringes of society.
He's essentially a ghost haunting his own life.
A ghost, yeah, but a ghost with a terrifyingly active, churning intellect. And in that extreme isolation, just staring at that peeling yellow wallpaper, Raskolnikov has developed this chilling philosophical theory.
Oh, the theory. This is where it gets crazy.
It really does. He has spent months dividing all of humanity into two distinct, rigid categories.
Okay, lay it out for us.
So the first category is the ordinary people. According to his theory, these people are just the masses. They exist merely to reproduce, to be obedient, and to maintain the status quo.
Right.
They're the raw material of history, but they aren't the makers of it. They're bound by the laws of society because they actually require those laws to survive.
So they're like the disposable cogs in the machine. They keep the wheels turning but never steer the ship.
Exactly. But the second category, and that's where the danger lies and where Raskolnikov focuses all his attention, these are the extraordinary people.
Like Napoleon.
Exactly like Napoleon Bonaparte. That's his primary example. He formulates this argument that the extraordinary man has an absolute intrinsic right to break laws.
Wait, like the right to?
The right to. He has the right to step over corpses, to shed blood, provided that this bloodshed serves a higher purpose.
A new idea, or like the relentless march of historical progress.
Right. In Raskolnikov's mind, if Napoleon had to slaughter thousands of men across Europe to bring about a new era of civilization, well, Napoleon wasn't a criminal.
He was a visionary.
He was a visionary acting on a completely different moral plane. The extraordinary man just isn't bound by the morality of the ordinary masses.
Okay, I want to push back on this just a bit, because if you just look at that theory on paper, it sounds like standard, albeit incredibly ruthless utilitarianism.
Sure.
Like it's the classic philosophical trolley problem blown up to a global scale, you know? Sacrifice the few to save the many, mixed with a healthy dose of historical grandiosity.
That's exactly how he views it consciously.
But the sources are clear that we can't let Raskolnikov off the hook as just some detached, objective philosopher sitting in an ivory tower.
Yeah.
The analysis dives deeply into the psychological roots of this idea.
Yes, and this is crucial. This isn't pure philosophy born in a vacuum. It seems to be a highly toxic, volatile chemical reaction to extreme poverty and systemic humiliation.
Right, because he's starving.
You're touching on the central mechanism of his entire delusion here. It's entirely reactionary. The psychological breakdown of this text draws a brilliant, explicit link between Raskolnikov's grand theory and the clinical concepts developed much later by Alfred Adler.
Okay, Adler. The inferiority complex guy, right?
Exactly, specifically the inferiority complex.
Yeah.
Adler posits this fascinating dynamic about the human ego. When a sensitive, highly intelligent mind is repeatedly crushed by reality, when it experiences profound powerlessness, grinding poverty, social invisibility, it doesn't necessarily become humble.
It doesn't just give up.
No, it doesn't always submit. Often, the psyche protects itself from complete annihilation by violently overcompensating.
Like building a shell.
A massive shell. It builds a wildly narcissistic, overinflated self-image as a desperate defense mechanism against the unbearable daily pain of being a nobody.
Wait, so let me process this. He's essentially a starving 20-something who convinces himself he's a god because the alternative is admitting he's a failure.
That's exactly it.
It sounds like someone playing a grand strategy video game, looking down at the digital map, deciding which units to sacrifice for the win. But he completely forgets that in the real world, he's actually one of the disposable, pixelated units himself.
That is a perfect analogy.
I mean, he's literally wearing rags, but in his head, he's the player controlling the board.
The video game analogy works perfectly for his conscious intellectual state, but I'd add a layer to it based on the sources.
Okay, go for it.
In a video game, you don't feel the units bleeding. Raskolnikov is trying to take his agonizing societal powerlessness, the fact that he is entirely at the mercy of landlords, predatory pawnbrokers, and the brutal economy of St. Petersburg, and flip it into an illusion of absolute inner omnipotence.
Right. If he can't control his external bank account or his social standing, he decides he's just going to conquer morality itself.
Exactly. And the philosophical consensus in our sources also connects his mindset to pre-Nietzschean thought.
Oh, like Max Stirner.
Yes, specifically the egoist philosophy of Max Stirner. Stirner argued that all societal structures, religion, law, traditional morality, are just spooks.
Spooks. Like ghosts.
Yeah, mere phantasms haunting the human mind. The only reality is the ego.
Wow.
Raskolnikov totally absorbs this. He wants to smash these societal idols, viewing them as invisible chains designed to keep the weak in line.
But the supreme irony is that in tearing down the idols of law and religion, he ends up creating a far more tyrannical, demanding idol, right?
His own imagined exceptionalism, he begins to worship the idea of his own superiority.
And as with any ancient tyrannical idol, it eventually demands a blood sacrifice.
Which brings us to his target.
Alyona Ivanovna.
The old pawnbroker. The text paints a remarkably visceral picture of her.
It really does. She is described as cool, diminutive, with grease-stained hair.
A woman who survives by exploiting the utter desperation of the poor. She gives them mere pennies for their most precious family heirlooms.
Their last connections to a dignified past.
Exactly, and then charges exorbitant predatory interest rates. She is, in Raskolnikov's incredibly warped utilitarian calculus, a louse.
A louse.
Yeah. He rationalizes that her hoarded wealth is doing nothing but sitting in a locked strongbox, gathering dust, while brilliant, deserving young men like him are literally starving to death in the gutters.
But his rationalization goes even deeper than just a general disdain for her profession, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It touches the very rawest nerve of his familial trauma. There's a critical catalyst in the narrative.
The letter.
The long, agonizing letter he receives from his mother, Pulcheria Alexandrovna. In this letter, reading between the lines of her polite maternal phrasing, he learns a horrifying truth.
About his sister, Dunya.
Yes. Dunya is essentially preparing to sell herself into a socially acceptable form of slavery.
She's about to marry this guy, Luzhin.
Right. And Luzhin is wealthy, he's a lawyer, he's arrogant, and he makes it chillingly clear that he desires Dunya not out of love, but precisely because she is destitute.
Oh.
He wants a wife who has been saved from the brink of starvation so she will be eternally subservient.
Forever looking up to him as her savior and her master. It's sickening.
It is, and Dunya, who is brilliant and proud, is sacrificing her life, her bodily autonomy, and her future just to save Raskolnikov and their mother from absolute destitution.
That letter must feel like a physical blow. Because Raskolnikov isn't stupid. He sees exactly what is happening.
He sees the subtext immediately.
He sees his sister making a legally sanctioned, socially applauded sacrifice of her humanity. He realizes that the ordinary world, the world of laws and polite society, allows this kind of slow, systemic violence every single day.
Yes. So his twisted utilitarian logic just kicks into overdrive.
Right, he's like, if Dunya is going to be sacrificed on the altar of poverty to a monster like Luzhin, why shouldn't the pawnbroker be sacrificed on the altar of progress?
That's the exact calculation.
If he kills the pawnbroker, takes her hoarded money, saves his sister from this monstrous marriage, and uses the rest of the funds to launch his own rise to greatness.
Yeah.
Isn't that mathematically, logically the right thing to do?
You've perfectly articulated the terrifying seduction of pure logic divorced from empathy. In the sterile, airtight vacuum of his dingy room, the math works flawlessly.
It balances perfectly on the ledger.
He believes he is going to perform a necessary surgical strike. He's going to excise a parasite to save a healthy organism.
But, and this is the crux of the entire philosophical exploration we're doing here, theories are incredibly neat and clean when they remain abstract thoughts bouncing off yellow wallpaper.
Exactly. The tragedy, the real blood-curdling horror, begins when this abstract mathematical philosophy is forced to collide with the messy, unpredictable, fleshy reality of the physical world.
So he's got this airtight, brilliant theory. But theories assume a frictionless vacuum. Let's look at the terrifying friction of human error.
The dry run.
Right, because the second he actually decides to execute this plan, his perfect math starts to wobble. He goes to the pawnbroker's apartment, pawns an old silver watch, which, by the way, used to belong to his father.
A detail that just drips with the loss of his past and his connection to normal human inheritance.
Exactly. And he calculates everything like a machine. He counts the exact number of steps from the gateway of his building to her door.
730 steps.
He notes the layout of the stairs, the lighting of the stairwell, the optimal time of day when the neighbors are out.
He is desperately trying to turn a brutal, intimate act of violence into a sterile engineering problem.
Because he has to, right, to maintain the illusion.
He absolutely has to. He's trying to maintain the illusion of absolute godlike control. He's the extraordinary man flawlessly executing a rational historical plan.
But the psychological analysis in the sources points to a profound, undeniable internal rebellion that bubbles up right before the act.
Yes, the human nervous system, the deep unconscious psyche, it's not easily subdued by utilitarian math. On the eve of the murder, exhausted and feverish, Raskolnikov falls asleep in the bushes of a park and has a dream.
The horse dream.
The horse dream. And this is not just passing imagery, it is perhaps the most psychologically significant moment in his entire journey.
It's devastating.
He dreams of his childhood. He's a young boy again, maybe 7 years old, walking with his father in a dusty provincial town. They come across a tavern, and outside this tavern, a group of drunken, brutish peasants, led by a man named Mikolka, are overloading a frail, old, miserable mare attached to a massive, heavy cart.
That scene is absolutely gut-wrenching. The drunken owner, Mikolka, gets furious that this frail little horse can't pull the impossible load, so he starts beating it.
Not just with a whip, but with a thick piece of wood and eventually a heavy iron crowbar.
He screams, "My property! I can do what I want!" And the crowd around the tavern laughs. They cheer him on.
They are completely complicit in the brutality.
But the child Raskolnikov doesn't laugh. He breaks away from his father's grip. His father, who was just saying, come along, it's none of our business, they are drunk.
Right.
And the child runs right into the chaos. He throws his little arms around the bleeding head of the horse, weeping uncontrollably as the animal is literally beaten to death right in front of him.
It is a devastating, traumatic image, and our sources analyze its profound mechanical significance to his psyche. Why does his subconscious offer him this specific, horrifying nightmare mere hours before he intends to pick up an axe?
Right. What's the deep meaning there?
The psychological reading suggests it reveals the absolute core of his true nature, which he is actively trying to murder. The dream represents the violent, irreconcilable schism in his soul.
Wow.
In the dream, he is the compassionate child weeping in raw, unadulterated agony for the victim of senseless, arbitrary violence. He's the embodiment of pure, unfiltered human empathy.
But in his waking life.
In his waking life, he's preparing to become Mikolka. He is preparing to become the drunken, brutal peasant, bringing the iron crowbar down on a defenseless creature, simply because he believes he has the right to do so. He is preparing to be the very monster that made his younger self weep.
It proves that his philosophical detachment is a complete and utter lie.
A total fabrication.
He isn't a cold, calculating, extraordinary machine. He's a deeply empathetic human being who is having to violently, psychologically suppress his own deep well of compassion just to even consider this crime.
But here is the terrifying momentum of an ideology. Despite the screaming warning of the dream, despite his body literally resisting the idea to the point of a fever, the sheer inertia of his theory pushes him forward.
He wakes up. He procures an axe from the porter's lodge. He sews a secret loop inside his oversized overcoat to hide it.
The preparation.
Yeah. He sneaks up the stairs to the pawnbroker's apartment. He knocks on the door.
And this is the precise moment where the theoretical architecture of the extraordinary man completely crumbles upon impact with physical reality.
Because it's not a math problem anymore.
Exactly. He gains entry. He distracts Alyona Ivanovna with a fake pledge, a piece of wood and iron tied together to look like a silver cigarette case. She struggles with the knot. She turns her back to him, peering at it in the dim light.
And then Raskolnikov pulls the axe from his coat and brings the blunt edge down on her head.
The analysis focuses heavily on the sensory reality of this moment. It is no longer an abstract concept of removing a louse. It is a wet, brutal, horrifying physical reality.
The heavy thud of the skull.
The sudden, astonishing volume of blood. He realizes he is not a surgeon, he is a butcher.
And he completely panics, right?
He starts frantically searching her pockets, fumbling with her keys, his hands shaking, dropping things. The perfect execution degrades instantly into panicked animal scrambling.
And then the universe, which always defies our neatest calculations, delivers the fatal blow to his theory. The door, which he forgot to lock in his panicked state, opens.
And in walks Lizaveta,
the pawnbroker's younger half-sister.
Mm-hmm.
And we really have to talk about Lizaveta because she is everything the pawnbroker is not.
Yes. She is described as simple-minded, innocent, deeply religious, constantly pregnant, and heavily, brutally abused by the pawnbroker herself.
She is a victim of the very same systemic exploitation Raskolnikov claimed his grand theory was fighting against. She's the ultimate innocent.
She walks in carrying a bundle of clothes. She sees the blood pooling on the floor. She sees her sister dead. And she sees Raskolnikov standing there, chest heaving, holding the dripping axe.
And pay attention to her reaction because the sources say it absolutely shatters him. She doesn't even scream.
She is so fundamentally used to subjugation, to being beaten, to living in fear, that she simply backs away, trembling, and raises her free hand in a pathetic, defenseless, almost childlike gesture to protect her face.
Raskolnikov, completely trapped, his grand logic entirely evaporated, running entirely on the blind adrenaline of a cornered animal.
Yeah.
He rushes her.
He brings the sharp edge of the axe down on her skull, splitting it open.
In his head, killing the pawnbroker was the necessary evil. But killing Lizaveta, isn't that the moment the entire philosophical justification just instantly evaporates? Because Lizaveta wasn't part of the math.
You've hit the absolute structural failure of his ideology. The murder of Lizaveta is the fatal flaw, the ultimate collapse of Raskolnikov's grand theory. He cannot justify it, even to himself.
Because he didn't kill her for the greater good.
Right. He didn't kill her to redistribute wealth or to alter the course of historical progress. He killed her out of pure animalistic self-preservation.
He killed an innocent to save his own skin.
In that single horrific, unplanned moment, the illusion of the extraordinary man is shattered forever. He is not Napoleon standing triumphantly over a battlefield. He is just a frightened, desperate, sweaty murderer slipping in a pool of blood in a dingy apartment.
The murder ceases to be a theoretical triumph and becomes a grotesque reality. When he brought the axe down on Lizaveta, he didn't just kill an innocent woman, he severed his own connection to humanity.
He murdered his own soul.
And the immediate aftermath is pure, unadulterated chaos. He barely escapes. He has to hide in an empty, freshly painted apartment 1 floor down, standing trembling behind a door while painters and the building porter are literally inches away on the landing.
They're investigating the locked door of the crime scene.
Right. And he's just trapped there. The smell of fresh paint mixing with the phantom smell of blood.
He escapes entirely by chance, slipping out when they run downstairs for help. He walks back to his room, unseen, sliding back into his coffin like Garrett, a ghost once again.
But once he is back in that room, once the hook is on the door, the true nightmare begins. The police haven't even been called yet.
The legal punishment is 0 at this point.
Right. But the biological and psychological punishment kicks in with the force of a hurricane. He falls into a delirious, terrifying fever. He sleeps for days, waking up only to frantically check his clothes for frayed threads soaked in blood.
Yes, the anatomy of his guilt is entirely somatic at first. To understand this post-crime behavior, we have to invoke the psychological frameworks pioneered by Sigmund Freud.
Okay, Freud, like what specific concept?
Specifically, the concept of conversion disorder and the violent war between the conscious and unconscious mind. What we are witnessing in Raskolnikov's tiny room is a mind violently, irreconcilably split in two.
Like a civil war.
Exactly. His conscious intellectual mind, the ego, stubbornly clings to the philosophical narrative. He keeps telling himself, I was right to do it, the math was sound, she was a louse, I am an extraordinary man.
My only crime is that I lack the absolute ruthlessness to carry it out perfectly.
Right. He furiously refuses to consciously feel remorse for the pawnbroker. He is angry at his own weakness, not his immorality.
But the body keeps the score. His unconscious mind knows the absolute truth of what he's done.
Exactly. And I use that word carefully here because it's an exact mechanical process. His unconscious mind, the deepest part of him that wept for the beaten horse, rejects the act entirely.
And because his proud conscious mind acts as a dam.
Right, refusing to allow the guilt to be processed emotionally. The unconscious mind forces the trauma out physically. It manifests as a violent, debilitating illness. The fever, the chills, the fainting spells, these aren't just convenient traumatic devices.
It is the physical embodiment of a broken conscience.
His body is literally, organically rejecting his philosophy. His nervous system is staging a violent rebellion against his intellect.
I used the corrupted file analogy earlier, but let me update it based on what you're saying.
Go for it.
It's not just that his mind is a computer crashing, it's the logic center, the operating system, keeps flashing a message saying everything is operating normally, the utilitarian calculation was correct.
Yeah.
But the hardware, the cooling fans, the motherboard is literally overheating, sparking, and catching fire.
Yes.
The system is crashing because the fundamental code of human empathy cannot run the software of a sociopath.
That is exactly what is happening. And the things he does when he wakes from this fever are bizarre.
Oh, yeah.
If he were a cold, rational criminal, he would lay low. He would stay in his room, but he does the opposite.
He wanders the streets aimlessly. At one point, he gets summoned to the police station for a completely unrelated, trivial debt dispute regarding his rent.
Right, he's terrified, but it's just about rent.
And while he's standing there, relieved that it's just a rent issue, he overhears two detectives casually discussing the murder of the pawnbroker. And Raskolnikov, this brilliant calculating mind, literally passes out dead away on the floor.
Just the word murder in a police station shuts his entire biological system down.
He thinks he's hiding, but his subconscious is desperately trying to get him caught, isn't it?
It is the ultimate paradox of the criminal mind, which, by the way, Dostoevsky meticulously maps out decades before the formal establishment of psychoanalysis.
Wow, that's wild.
The isolation of the secret becomes infinitely heavier than the fear of the punishment. Raskolnikov acts in ways that are deeply, almost comically self-destructive if his only goal is evasion.
There is a magnificent, unbearable scene highlighted in our analysis, where Raskolnikov goes to a brightly lit tavern called the Crystal Palace.
Ah, yes, the Crystal Palace scene.
He's reading newspapers, looking for articles about the murder, and he runs into Zamyatov, a sharp, fashionable, young police clerk. And what does Raskolnikov do? He doesn't avoid him.
He leans in.
He practically taunts him. He sits across from a man who works for the police and outlines exactly how he would have committed the murder, how he would have slipped past the painters, how he would have taken the stolen goods and hidden them under a large unhewn stone in a courtyard.
He plays a terrifying, dizzying game of psychological chicken.
Bringing himself within a microscopic fraction of a full confession, watching Zamyatov's eyes widen only to pull back at the absolute last second with a manic, terrifying laugh, saying, "And what if it was me who murdered the old woman Elizaveta?"
It's just...
That scene is so tense it makes your teeth ache. I'm trying to wrap my head around the mechanics of that conversation. Why does he do that? Is it just pure arrogance? Is he showing off his intellect to the police clerk, proving he's smarter than the system?
It's a very common misread to see it purely as arrogance. The deeper analysis reveals it is an agonizing, suffocating need for connection.
Connection. By taunting a cop.
Yes, because by committing an act that no one else can know about, an act that violates the fundamental social contract of human life, Raskolnikov has exiled himself from the human race.
Oh, I see.
He has locked himself in an invisible, solitary confinement. He can't look at his mother, who has just arrived in the city. He can't look at his devoted friend Razumikin without feeling an impenetrable, icy wall between them.
His secret is an abyss.
The punishment isn't the fear of the police baton, it's the sheer, crushing weight of being severed from the rest of humanity. Taunting Zamyatov, or later, when he literally returns to the crime scene.
Oh yeah, he rings the bell of the pawnbroker's apartment just to hear the sound again.
And morbidly asks the workmen about the blood on the floor. These are not the acts of a mastermind. These are the desperate, flailing attempts of a drowning man trying to make contact with the reality of his own life, even if that contact brings about his own destruction.
He'd rather be a known monster than an unknown ghost?
Exactly.
So his theory isolated him, the physical act of murder isolated him further, and now he is suffocating in that isolation. But what's fascinating about diving into this world is that Raskolnikov isn't the only one in St. Petersburg dealing with the consequences of exploiting others.
No, not at all.
The narrative zooms out here to show us that Dostoevsky built an entire ecosystem of exploitation. He introduces characters who act as dark mirrors. They represent different facets of Raskolnikov's philosophy, but they are actually realized and operating in the society around him.
The two major mirrors we really have to examine are Luzhin and Svidrigailov.
Let's get into them. These guys are wild.
They are absolutely essential for understanding the broader social and philosophical critique at play. Let's start with Fyodor Petrovich Luzhin.
The man Dunya is engaged to.
Right. The analytical framework views Luzhin as the perfect embodiment of legal exploitation. He represents the very capitalist, economic, utilitarian logic that Raskolnikov twisted into a justification with an axe, but Luzhin plays strictly, cleanly by the rules of society.
So he's not murdering people with axes, but
he is morally bankrupt. Luzhin is wealthy, he's a respectable lawyer, he wears fine clothes, and he talks endlessly about new economic theories and progress. But underneath the veneer, he is a bureaucratic monster.
Like we discussed, he wants to marry Dunya precisely because she is poor and disgraced.
He actually relishes the fact that she has been slandered in her previous employment because it means she will be forever economically dependent and subservient to him. He wants to purchase a human soul at a discount.
He's executing violence by spreadsheet. But when Raskolnikov, who immediately sees through Luzhin's polite facade, aggressively rejects him and forbids the marriage, Luzhin doesn't just walk away.
No, he seeks revenge, and he does it in the most cowardly, calculated, bureaucratic way possible.
The mechanism of his revenge is horrifying in its banality. He tries to frame Sonia.
Let's talk about Sonia for a second. Sonia is the deeply marginalized, impoverished daughter of a local drunkard named Marmeladov. Raskolnikov has befriended her and feels a deep kinship with her.
Right. And during a crowded, chaotic funeral feast for Marmeladov, hosted by his hysterical, dying widow, Katerina Ivanovna Luzhin orchestrates a trap.
He does. Earlier, under the guise of charity, Luzhin had called Sonia to his room and given her a 10-ruble note. But while she wasn't looking, he secretly slipped a folded 100-ruble note into her pocket.
And then in the middle of the funeral feast, in front of everyone, Luzhin arrives and loudly accuses Sonia of stealing the 100 rubles.
He demands she be searched. And of course, the money falls right out of her pocket.
The entire room turns on her. Katerina Ivanovna is screaming, defending her, but the evidence is literally right there.
Luzhin's goal is multi-layered. He wants to ruin Sonia's reputation completely. Prove to Dunya and her mother that Raskolnikov associates with common thieves and prostitutes.
And thereby shatter Raskolnikov's moral authority in the family, reasserting his own dominance.
Exactly. He is entirely willing to send an innocent, desperate young girl to a Siberian labor camp purely for leverage in a family argument. Luzhin operates entirely within the law. He doesn't wield an axe. He wields economic power, social standing, and calculated deceit.
The philosophical question posed here by the sources is Luzhin's soul any less murderous than Raskolnikov's?
That's the real question. He destroys lives cleanly without ever getting blood on his cuffs. He is the ordinary world's version of the extraordinary man.
It's chilling because Luzhin is the monster society rewards. But then we have the other mirror, Svidrigailov. And this guy is operating on a completely different frankly terrifying frequency.
Svidrigailov is a nightmare.
He was Dunya's former employer, an immensely wealthy aristocratic landowner. He pursued Dunya relentlessly, obsessively, even while his own wife, Marfa Petrovna, was alive. Then, mysteriously, his wife dies.
And the text heavily implies, without ever fully confirming, that he either poisoned her or abused her to the point of a fatal stroke.
Now he has come to St. Petersburg, seemingly following Dunya. He moves like a shadow. He lives next door to Sonia. He literally eavesdrops on Raskolnikov's most intimate, damning confessions through a thin, crack-filled wall.
He knows all of Raskolnikov's secrets. He operates entirely outside the law, possessed of vast wealth, and crucially, he seems to feel absolutely no conventional guilt whatsoever.
Svidrigailov is the ultimate existential terror for Raskolnikov. Because if Luzhin is the ordinary man using the system for evil, Svidrigailov is the extraordinary man in actual practice.
He is the living, breathing, walking manifestation of Raskolnikov's theory, fully realized.
He has stepped over the moral line. He has likely caused death. He has engaged in unimaginable debauchery. He acts entirely on his own whims and desires, and society cannot touch him.
He is legally untouchable because of his wealth, and he is morally numb.
So wait, Svidrigailov is basically what Raskolnikov wanted to be, right? A guy who stepped over the line, broke all the rules, and just doesn't care.
In theory, yes.
He doesn't have fevers. He doesn't faint at the police station. He's the absolute master of his own universe. So I have to ask, why does Raskolnikov find him so physically and morally repulsive? You'd think they would be kindred spirits. They should be starting a club.
That is the brilliant, devastating psychological twist of the novel. Raskolnikov is repulsed precisely because Svidrigailov forces him to look at the actual, inevitable endgame of his own philosophy.
Oh, wow.
The analysis shows that while Svidrigailov is indeed the extraordinary man in practice, his life is a horrifying, echoing, empty void. Absolute freedom from morality has not made him a god, it has made him a ghost.
He's just empty.
Profoundly, terminally bored. He describes eternity not as a grand cosmos, but as a tiny, soot-blackened bathhouse filled with spiders. He is haunted by literal, waking nightmares of his dead wife and the spectral victims of his past abuses. He lives in a state of terminal existential apathy.
And he pursues Dunya not out of fiery passion, but as a final, desperate, flailing attempt to feel something, anything. To find a single spark of meaning in the void he has created by destroying every moral boundary in his life.
And that pursuit of Dunya culminates in one of the most claustrophobic scenes imaginable. He lures Dunya to his locked apartment. He reveals he knows her brother is a murderer and essentially offers to save Raskolnikov from Siberia.
He offers to use his wealth to cover it all up, but only if Dunya yields to him. He traps her.
And when Dunya definitively rejects him...
she realizes she is locked in a room with a monster. She pulls a revolver on him, a gun she brought to protect herself. She fires.
The bullet grazes his temple.
And he doesn't flinch. He steps closer. She raises the gun again, but she realizes she simply cannot kill him in cold blood. Her humanity prevents it. She throws the gun away and looks at him with absolute, unyielding, visceral revulsion. She makes it clear she would rather die than surrender to him.
It is a moment of profound psychological clarity, and in that moment of absolute, undeniable rejection, Svidrigailov realizes that his absolute freedom has left him with absolutely nothing.
Wow.
He has no connections, no meaning, no love, no soul. He gives her the key. He lets her go.
And then he wanders out into the miserable, foggy, damp St. Petersburg night.
He spends hours wandering through the rain, staying in a filthy wooden hotel, having nightmares about a little girl who committed suicide because of him.
As dawn breaks, he walks out into the fog, approaches a confused, shivering little watchman huddled in an Achilles helmet, makes a cynical, deadpan joke about going to America, and shoots himself in the head.
For Raskolnikov, the analysis argues Svidrigailov's suicide is a fatal philosophical blow. It kills the fantasy.
It provides empirical proof that you cannot escape the moral law, step over humanity, and still find meaning in human life.
The route of getting away with it, of achieving the extraordinary man status, doesn't lead to greatness. It leads only to the suffocating boredom of madness or a bullet to the brain.
So Raskolnikov is watching the paths close around him. The route of the bureaucratic monster, Luzhin, is repulsive and petty. The route of the successful, extraordinary man, Svidrigailov, ends in a cold street with a revolver.
He is trapped in the middle, sweating, feverish, and deeply isolated.
And just as the existential net begins to tighten, we meet the mastermind who is pulling the strings. We meet Porfiry Petrovich, the lead investigator of the murders.
Ah, Porfiry. He is arguably one of the most fascinating literary detectives ever created. He's really a precursor to the modern psychological profiler.
When we think of a detective, we usually think of someone looking for physical clues. Fingerprints, establishing timelines, matching fibers, finding eyewitnesses.
But Porfiry operates on a completely different, almost spiritual plane. The psychological breakdown of his character details his brilliant, highly unconventional methods. Porfiry suspects Raskolnikov almost immediately. He senses the psychological footprint of the man.
But he has absolutely no hard evidence. No weapon, no witnesses, no blood on his clothes. He cannot legally arrest him.
So instead of interrogating him in a dark room with a bright light in his face, Porfiry engages him in a series of friendly, meandering, almost comically absurd philosophical debates.
He plays this incredible persona. He acts like a bumbling, slightly confusing, overweight uncle. He paces around his apartment in his slippers. He offers Raskolnikov tea. He talks in endless circles about his own hemorrhoids. He apologizes profusely for taking up his time. He acts entirely non-threatening.
It is a meticulously calculated performance. He is deliberately disarming the intellect. During one of their most intense meetings, Porfiry casually brings up an old article that Raskolnikov wrote months before the murder.
The article titled On Crime.
Right, which had recently been published without Raskolnikov's knowledge. In this article, Raskolnikov outlined his entire theory of the ordinary and extraordinary man. Porfiry asks him to explain it.
With his faux wide-eyed innocence.
But tell me, Rodion Romanovich, how do we distinguish these extraordinary people? Do they wear a special mark? Do they wear a specific uniform? What if an ordinary man gets confused and thinks he is extraordinary and starts, well, eliminating obstacles?
Yeah.
Porfiry is letting Raskolnikov know, without explicitly saying a single accusatory word, I have read your mind, I know your philosophical motive, I know exactly why you would do this.
It's like Porfiry is a master of psychological judo. I want to drill down on how this actually works. He's not using his own strength or the heavy, blunt authority of the law to take Raskolnikov down.
No, not at all.
He's using the immense weight of Raskolnikov's own massive ego, his intellectual pride, and his raging subconscious guilt against him. He just gives him enough conversational rope, letting Raskolnikov talk and talk, essentially tricking him into proving his own psychological guilt.
That is the precise dynamic. Porfiry understands the criminal pathology deeply. He knows that Raskolnikov is not a hardened professional killer who kills for profit. He knows he's a divided, tormented, highly sensitive intellectual who committed a crime to prove a point.
So Porfiry doesn't want to trap him legally. He wants to trap him psychologically.
He creates an atmosphere of intolerable suspense. At their final meeting, Porfiry drops the act entirely. He essentially tells him, I know you did it, and you know I know you did it. But he doesn't arrest him.
He leaves him free to walk the streets, free to return to his dingy room, leaving him to stew in the terror of anticipation.
Porfiry calculates quite correctly that Raskolnikov's own desperate need for resolution, his fundamental inability to live in the agonizing liminal state of being a suspected ghost, will eventually break his mind.
There's an incredible piece of psychology here regarding the interrogator's patience. Porfiry compares Raskolnikov to a moth circling a candle flame. He says the moth will keep flying closer and closer to the light, dizzy with the tension, circling, until it finally flies right into the fire, just to end the agony of the suspense.
He knows the human mind cannot sustain that level of dissonance. Porfiry understands that Raskolnikov cannot endure the isolation of his crime forever.
Right.
So in their final interaction, Porfiry offers him a strange, almost fatherly sort of mercy. He comes to Raskolnikov's room for a quiet conversation. He lays all his cards on the table.
He tells him that a false confession they recently received from a mentally unstable painter named Nikolai, a man who falsely confessed due to his own religious fanaticism and desire to suffer, won't hold up. And Porfiry knows it.
He tells Raskolnikov directly, you are the murderer. But he advises him to confess on his own terms, not to appease the legal system, but to save his own soul.
He tells him that suffering is a great thing, and that by accepting his punishment, he will find air to breathe again.
He diagnoses Raskolnikov's core problem flawlessly. He is spiritually and psychologically suffocating.
You need air. What a profound, terrifying way to look at guilt. Not as a moral feeling, but as a deprivation of oxygen.
It really is.
But here's the beautiful tragedy of the entire narrative arc. The final, definitive push toward that confession doesn't actually come from the brilliant detective. Porfiry sets the stage perfectly, yes, but the catalyst that finally breaks Raskolnikov's iron pride comes from the most marginalized, powerless, dismissed person in the entire story.
It comes from Sonia.
Sonia Semyonovna Marmeladov. The philosophical analysis elevates her not just as a tragic supporting character, but as the absolute philosophical antithesis to Raskolnikov.
We must understand her context to understand her power. As we noted earlier, she is the daughter of the drunkard Marmeladov.
Right.
When her father lost his job and drank away their last pennies, and her stepmother and young siblings were literally starving to death, freezing in a barren room, Sonia was forced into prostitution.
She had to take the yellow ticket, the official police license of a prostitute in Imperial Russia, to bring home enough money to keep her family from dying. She is the ultimate bruised victim of the city's brutal economic engine.
And when her father is crushed by a horse-drawn carriage in the street and dies in agony, Raskolnikov, in one of his spontaneous acts of immense irrational generosity, an act that totally contradicts his utilitarian math, gives Katerina Ivanovna all the money his mother sent him to pay for the funeral.
He empties his pockets for them. He is drawn to Sonia. He is magnetized by her profound, bottomless suffering.
He is drawn to her because she represents everything his philosophy failed to account for. Raskolnikov tried to conquer the suffering of the world by inflicting it on others. He tried to elevate himself to the status of a god, deciding who lives and dies.
He is the ultimate Nietzschean egoist, trying to impose his will.
Sonia, on the other hand, operates on Christian existentialism. She accepts suffering in order to save others. She sacrifices her body, her reputation, her purity, and her place in polite society, entirely out of love and duty for children that aren't even her own. She is a figure of radical, self-emptying compassion.
The analysis points out a pivotal scene where Raskolnikov goes to Sonia's squalid, bare room. He asks her to read from her New Testament, specifically the story of the raising of Lazarus.
It's a profound moment. The murderer and the prostitute huddled around a flickering candle, reading about a man being called forth from the rotting tomb.
When Raskolnikov eventually decides to confess his crime to her, he's looking for a mirror that won't shatter him. I really want to dissect this choice. Why her?
It's a great question.
He could have just walked to the police station and ended it with Porfiry. It feels like going to the police is a surrender to the system, to the ordinary rules he hates. But going to Sonia, is that him looking for a spiritual pardon rather than legal one? What does a marginalized, impoverished young woman offer him that the entire legal apparatus of the Russian Empire cannot?
You've identified the core existential shift. She offers him the only viable path back to the human race. When he confesses to her, it is a torturous, agonizing scene. He tries to explain his theory, the math, the Napoleon idea.
He expects her to recoil in horror, to judge him, or perhaps in his darkest fantasies, to validate his theory that he was trying to do something great for mankind.
But she does none of those things. She doesn't engage with his philosophy. She doesn't debate the utility of killing the pawnbroker.
She looks at him, takes in the full horror of what he has done, that he has swung an axe into the skulls of two women, and her reaction is one of immense, heartbreaking pity.
He doesn't just pity the victims in that moment. She pities his soul. She throws her arms around him and cries out, "What have you done to yourself? There is no one in the whole world more unhappy than you are now."
What have you done to yourself? That single line completely reorients the crime. She sees the murder not just as an attack on the pawnbroker, but as an act of profound self-mutilation. Raskolnikov thought he was surgically cutting out a tumor from society, but Sonia sees instantly that he has taken the knife and cut out his own heart.
Precisely. It is a spiritual suicide. And because she understands the spiritual reality of his act, the solution she offers is not a legal strategy, and it is not an intellectual debate. You cannot logic your way out of existential guilt.
The philosophical reading emphasizes that Sonia demands an existential, physical act of submission. She tells him he must take his cross. She literally gives him a cypress cross.
She tells him to go to the crossroads in the center of the city, the Haymarket, a place of crowds and dirt, a place swarming with the very ordinary people he despised.
She tells him to bow down, to kiss the earth he has defiled, and to confess aloud to the world, "I am a murderer."
She represents the profound Dostoevskian idea that healing only comes through the active embrace of suffering. You cannot think your way to redemption. You must suffer through it to be reborn. The ego must be physically dismantled.
He has to physically humble himself before the very masses he thought he was superior to. And he actually does it. It's a staggering scene. He goes to the Haymarket crossroads. He falls to his knees in the dirt. People laugh at him. They think he's just another drunk who has lost his mind.
But in that moment when he bows down and kisses the filthy St Petersburg earth, It is the visible, physical shattering of his immense intellectual pride. It is the death of the extraordinary man.
That physical act of submission is the necessary prerequisite for the ultimate legal reckoning. He finally walks into the police station, walks past the explosive lieutenant, Ilya Petrovich, and confesses clearly to the murders.
But as the psychological framework argues so powerfully throughout this entire analysis, the true reckoning, the actual punishment, has already happened. The legal sentence handed down by the court is merely the bureaucratic echo of the spiritual collapse that has been occurring since the exact moment the axe fell on the pawnbroker's skull.
Okay, let's step back and look at the enormous scope of what we've unpacked here. We've tracked how a toxic, volatile mix of extreme poverty, social isolation, and breathtaking intellectual arrogance led a brilliant young man to swing an axe.
He thought he was proving a grand mathematical equation about human worth, only to find that the blow severed his own essential connection to humanity.
We've seen that the true punishment wasn't the police, or even Porfiry's brilliant psychological mind games. It was the unbearable, suffocating weight of living outside the human race. It was the terrifying fever of a biological body violently rejecting its own mind's logic.
And as we synthesize the epilogue of this narrative journey, we find Raskolnikov in a sprawling, freezing prison camp in Siberia. He has been sentenced to 8 years of hard labor, a relatively light sentence due to his confession and evidence of his past good deeds.
Sonia, demonstrating the absolute unyielding endurance of her compassion, has followed him there, living in a small village near the camp, visiting him at the gates.
But the final philosophical point is vital. Arriving in Siberia is not the end of the punishment, but the incredibly slow, painful beginning of healing. For a long time in Siberia, Raskolnikov is still bitter. His ego hasn't fully died.
He avoids the other prisoners, and they hate him, sensing his residual arrogance. He still clings to the idea that his only crime was being too weak, too ordinary to carry out his grand idea successfully without breaking down.
He's still holding on to the corrupted file. But slowly, the harsh environment strips away the last vestiges of his theories, and the final destruction of his ideology comes in the form of another dream. The dream of the Trekine.
What's that dream about?
In the camp hospital, delirious again, he dreams of a plague sweeping the globe. But it's not a virus of the body. It's a microscopic virus of pure rationality, of pure will. Every person infected by these microbes believes they have the absolute infallible truth.
Everyone believes they are the extraordinary man.
Because everyone is absolutely right, no one can agree. Society breaks down into total apocalyptic slaughter. Everyone kills everyone else in the name of their own grand ideas.
It's the logical conclusion of his theory applied to everyone. If everyone is a god, there is nothing left but war.
Exactly. The dream terrifies him because it shows him the ultimate catastrophic endgame of his own intellect. Stripped of his city, his intellectual pride, his grand illusions, and reduced to the simplest, harshest conditions of existence, Raskolnikov finally breaks.
On a warm spring day, sitting by the riverbank, looking out at the vast free steppes, he falls at Sonia's feet, weeping, finally and fully accepting his ordinary, flawed, suffering humanity. He is resurrected.
The profound tragedy of this analysis isn't that a brilliant man was caught by the police. The triumph is that a human being couldn't live with being a monster. The triumph is that the human conscience, however deeply buried under layers of utilitarian philosophy and immense pride, ultimately survived the axe.
The conscience survived. Raskolnikov's ultimate trap was believing that his intellect made him immune to the moral and biological consequences of his actions. He thought he could optimize his way out of being human. I want to leave you with a thought as we wrap this up.
It's a heavy one to ponder.
As you navigate a modern world that constantly, enthusiastically rewards disruptors, a world that practically idolizes those who break the rules, move fast, and ignore the collateral damage to get ahead, ask yourself a question inspired by Raskolnikov's dingy yellow room. At what point does optimizing for success turn into sacrificing your own humanity? Are we still telling ourselves, in sleek boardrooms and complex algorithms, that if the goal is grand enough, if the technological progress is swift enough, the human collateral damage doesn't really matter? Because if we are, we might just be swinging an axe in the dark, waiting for the fever to set in. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. And remember, the mind is a terrifying place to hide a secret.